So I'm from Digital Realty. We are the largest wholesale provider. So Equinix has got a larger market cap, unfortunately, but physical square footage, we're still the largest. We also technically did start the wholesale outsourced colo industry back in 2003, 2004. So we've seen a lot of change in that time, which I'll touch on as well. I joined Digital in 2011 in London. I'm currently in Singapore with them. I moved over in 2015. So as long as I'm going through a lot of futuristic stuff in this, I also want to touch on Asia. And they both really go hand in my perspective, having the honor to work there for 2.5 years now. I grew up in Hong Kong as well, so I do have ties to Asia. But if we're talking about any of these trends that we're talking in terms of growth, and we're talking about growth all day, that's happening everywhere, and rightly so, but it's really happening in Asia. And the numbers in Asia, which we'll touch on, will really blow you away. But also in terms of the technology coming out of Asia now. And so I'll touch on China as well. And China, historically, its growth and current growth and size in terms of finance is really through its production manufacturing capability. You want to watch that space for AI capability now, because that is really, really developing. And I think that's the leap that's going to happen. I'll touch on some of the cloud guys coming out from China and what they're doing around robotics and cloud and intelligent and smart cloud, as Google is as well, to be fair. But in terms of the AI technology, there's really some special stuff happening there. So with that, I'll look to the lights. So that's World Economic Forum's coined fourth industrial revolution, and that was by a gentleman, Klaus Schwab, for those that obviously did know that term, and it's a pretty industrial term at the moment. I think the key thing that changes or makes this industrial revolution very different, and it would be different, I guess, for us, but if we live through the others, they are pretty transformative as well, is in Klaus's quote there for me. It's the very essence of our human experience. So we heard that a few times, and I also spoke with Gary on the 3-year-old speaking to the house, which was pretty cool. I'll reuse that. But again, I was with my nephews over the weekend, and they're 6 and 9, and iPad for at least 3-4 years. They've been on the iPad. You ask a question, you can ask them about the ancient Egyptian pyramids, and they'll give you an answer. They'll check on Google, but you'll get an answer. And this is changing how they go through the education system now, and that is what we don't understand in terms of this industrial revolution. Is how is this new generation going to develop? It's going to be very different, both in terms of how they work and the kinds of jobs, which we'll touch on, that they'll go into, but also how they learn. The second piece is important there, and that's the CEO of Accenture. If you go to Fortune 500 since year 2000, just over half have disappeared. So we were formed in 2003, 2004. We IPO'd, and we had maybe about 10 data centers when we IPO'd. So it was GI Partners in the US, large pension funds in the US really investing in technical real estate. And one of our very early customers, our current CEO, but then CFO Bill Stein met with, was Facebook. And we had to do a tenant check on Facebook to see if they're a worthy customer to come in. Luckily, we said yes, and now they're one of our top 10 customers. But just that scale of growth, and again, if we go back to us being formed 2003, 2004, we're now 2017, we're about 150 plus data centers, 20 plus billion revenue market cap. And that's us. Now, of course, we can go through many, many examples of other companies. The question now for us in this room and this industry, and that's why it's a very exciting, and it was interesting the point there around talent and getting talent into the industry, because we see that. We see that in Asia as well. It's a very competitive market. But also in terms of the young wanting to come into this industry, I get very angry when people say, data centers are boring, infrastructure is boring. Then you look at our customers, and it's some of the most exciting customers in the world. Google, Facebook, YouTube, not just us, I'm talking the whole industry. It's one of the most exciting things happening on the earth today. It goes through these buildings and through our infrastructure, and that's the piece which I think is very exciting and important for us in the room today. So this is something I like to share when we talk about development and speed of development. This is New York City, 1905. Just, you can see the people, but I'll just look at the horses, which is quite key, horse and carriage. So 80% of the agricultural production of the US, 1905, fed horses, because horses was doing everything. We jump forward 10 years, roughly, 10, 12 years, again, New York City, all the horses gone. 80% agricultural production, no more. Also, in terms of transport, you can imagine the change and difference that's happened then. If we jump forward another 10 years, in terms of where we are or where we're about to go, where do we go from there? But I'll come back to the analogy of the horses, because there's another link between horses and humans, which isn't so positive, but we can touch on, about where humans will go eventually, or where our place at least in this new world is. But in terms of where transport is going, flying cars already, we see Uber and the others working on that in terms of Uber Elevate. It's already in the app planning. In places like Indonesia, where we are, traffic is horrendous. They're looking at helicopter cabs already. And then Rolls-Royce is already working on ships. Again, we talked about shipping and logistics. Completely unmanned. You'll see there's no captain quarter. You don't need anything. It's completely unmanned shipping. Again, in the works, coming, already a massive logistical piece. So the key thing, I think, around where we are today and where we're going is just the sheer speed. So if we talk about growth today and we talk about exponential growth, this is something I do come back to a lot, and it's a good place to keep coming back to, because these guys can see into the future much better. And if you listen to any of Ray Kurzweil, so this is the gentleman now, he's a senior engineer at Google. He is one of the top thinkers in the last few decades. This guy's got it right over and over again. And they go to him and they say, how have you got this right? How have you? He said, it's a calculation. It's similar to Moore's law. I know that chip technology and the cost of chip technology is changing at these rates. I knew this stuff. And he shows the graphs where he's worked out specifically when things are going to happen. Generally, not everything. So if you go and look at what he's talking about in terms of the singularity, which is when computer technology, AI technology will overtake human technology. He just spoke probably last month, around 2040, 2045. So that date's been put out there. Elon Musk and others also working through on good AI versus bad AI. But again, it's the speed. You just need to go back, and this goes right back to the start of life on Earth. And the exponential nature is what we're struggling with at the moment. It's the speed of what's coming next and the change. And it's three areas. And again, this sort of pervades every single industry that we work with in terms of our customers and our customers are seeing. And that's GNR. I guess the one they've added to the end of that is artificial intelligence, which pervades it to a degree. One, genetics, working with our own biology. And there's actually an interesting thing again around storage that obviously our company won't like the news too much, around storage on genetic and DNA strands at the moment. How biologically can they store data moving forward, which will, again, transform our industry as well. Nanotechnology, so really producing and manufacturing at the nanoscale, transforming industries from today onwards. And again, robotics. And within robotics is the AI piece, and that's what is really picking up ground now in terms of AI, in terms of the more science fiction type AI, and then we scale it back. So you look at Watson in terms of the Watson app, enabling AI to the masses. Very different to traditional AI. Again, general AI hasn't yet come. But again, in terms of cloud, we look at Google, we look at Alibaba, they're all talking about smart cloud. And that has trends of AI within it. And that's where they're trying to differentiate themselves. Data, again, we'll skip quickly through this, but there's a lot of stats on the growth of data, streams and streams of it. This is the one I think that is really quite key and exciting. If you look at the Forbes CEO survey recently, global CEOs, 72% of them, the next 3 years will be more critical for them than the last 50 years. So in terms of the speed of change and what's coming down the ramp for them in their industries, and this is not just generic, middle of the ground or growing companies, these are the large companies as well. If you listen to Jeff Bezos, he doesn't talk about if his industry gets disrupted, he's talking about when. So those guys, even at that level, if Amazon is talking about disruption, we should all be worried, in my view. But worry and opportunity. So again, in terms of growth, we're pretty much in the best industry there is, both in terms of the colo industry, in my view, it will change, and also in terms of Schneider Electric, in terms of the infrastructure and, of course, energy, which we'll touch on as well. Gartner put this out. I don't know if Russ is still with us, but this was pretty valid. We're seeing this across our corporate deployments. Hybrid cloud is where they're going in terms of usage. And then we touch on the big, is it 25, is it 50, or is it somewhere in between connected devices? We did a simple calculation just based on how many servers are running the devices that exist today in terms of mobile phones. We thought there's probably another 400 million new servers needed by 2020, very rough estimate. But again, this is probably even at the conservative end, because you consider you've got connected devices, you've got a phone, you've got a watch. Eventually it's going to be appliances, it's going to be clothes, even is today, all connected, all streaming data to each other. Again, from our sort of market stats of growth, we use this a lot with our investors, the stock market, because they like to hear about how big the industry is growing. And you see double digit in terms of all the areas. This is the one which is really exciting. And if you look at Asia specifically, in a lot of the emerging markets, the mobile data usage is exploding. And this goes back to the edge and back to data centers as well, in terms of how new data centers will look going into the future. So a little bit around growth. This is current population and internet usage. The key stats here, so roughly we've hit about 7.5. This was the start of the year, so we're probably much higher now in terms of the world population. 3.7 billion connected globally. If you look at Asia, 600 million, 339 million. We'll touch on where this penetration and the new growth has come from, this 31%. So this is what I wanted to bring out here. Why Asia is getting a lot of air cover and trends at the moment. It's 3 times the growth in terms of population. Again, in terms of internet penetration as well, it's pretty much high there and unmatched in the world, just because of the hundreds of millions each year that come online there, all going onto mobile. 1 billion more people by 2020, and this is the key stat. 10 countries will account for 70% of this, and there's a big one. So that's why Google just announced a cloud platform for Mumbai. We were there a few months ago, just visiting some of the large Indian SIs and partners there. India's going to lead that charge, obviously with China very close behind, and it's going to account for 55% of the global subscriber growth. You can just see there the 2 countries that really explode the whole growth, which is China and India, given their populations. The key thing on China, which we're not in China, but we're in Hong Kong, is really the 100 million or so that come online, 100, 150 million each year. Very similar to Indonesia, but again, China is very connected today. They've got a lot of a class that is coming up the ranks. And similar to India, when we were there, the interesting thing one of the analysts said to us was before sort of the more poorer classes, when they come to middle class, buy an air conditioner or buy a fridge even, they'll have a mobile phone. So that's why they digitized the currency. That's why they did IDs on the phones through Prime Minister Modi. And that's why they're going to be such massive cloud infrastructure and data transmitters for the future. So where's this going in terms of some of the references to humans and horses, unfortunately? Robotics is going to take more and more work. This is a factory, Alibaba factory, and you can see the robots are moving all the goods. There's still people in there, which is good to hear, but not as much as before. And again, it's not just in one location. This is multiple locations across China and also the region. And then you'll see there are still a few humans left, doing mainly the tracking and packing. And then the other thing that you do see if you do anything in Asia, but specifically China, is WeChat. So this is owned by Tencent, which is, I think now by stock value, one of the largest tech companies in the world, if not the largest, massive. And WeChat, you can say, right, that's WhatsApp for Facebook or something similar to a messenger chat. No, they do everything on the phone. So absolutely everything. They'll pay money, they'll buy air tickets, and you're just seeing a few examples there. They'll transfer money to other people. It's a one-stop shop. And when you speak with any of the Alibaba leaders as well, that's what they want to do. And if you think, you read some of Jack Ma's visions for the future, he talks about a future where a farmer in Africa will have a mobile phone, connect to the Alibaba marketplace, order raw materials from somewhere in China, and get it delivered to him, and Ali will control, or pretty much control, the whole of that network and that supply chain. And that's pretty powerful. If you look at the stats, again, this is from the start of the year, if I'm not mistaken, 800 million, so that's gone up, that's 800 million users. The daily average calls made is 100 million people making calls on the network. And very similar to Facebook and Google and some of the other guys we talk with, the infrastructure they need to develop this isn't available from sort of branded servers in the market. So they do produce their own servers and own technology, similar to the OCP and the other models that the large US tech guys do. So where we're going in terms of data streaming, it's been talked a lot around IoT, but just to simplify, what that physically means from today's world, where it's, generally human to machine endpoints, we're obviously going to machine in the predominant, and that's why it's so difficult to track between the 20 and the 50 billion figure. Again, I'll touch a little bit on smart city in a moment, because smart city and smart planet is key areas in Asia. Singapore's really pushing itself up as a smart city. But you've got the same in smart agriculture, smart healthcare, smart grid, which we touched on the importance of energy production, intelligent buildings, and of course, gets a lot of airtime, connected cars. But again, connected cars from twofold. One, around the data produced, that's streamed, but also the access of that data, which rightly in terms of the edge technology and the edge data centers required, the latency is key. So the speed of where that data needs to be analyzed and shared with cars around it means, traditional data center hubs aren't going to work. So we still believe, as we would, but there's still going to be a need for the large data centers, without a doubt, because there's just too much data being produced and analyzed and stored. But there's going to be edge and very small micro data centers pretty much everywhere, and we're seeing that slowly and surely. Thailand, we did a little bit with the Thai government, nothing in terms of data center, but more around the Thailand 4.0, which is a new smart city initiative they're doing. But again, if you look at any of the countries in Southeast Asia, they're all talking about these areas as if it's, common policy. Now, whether, they're trying to speed things up, but they talk about an S-curve, and the stuff they've got within the S-curve is next generation automotive. They're talking about connected cars. They're talking about smart electronics, medical tourism. And then on the next one, so that's their first current S-curve, and the next one for the government is going straight into robotics, aerospace, bioenergy, biochemicals. And it's looking at all this within the Thai infrastructure, but then also the surrounding region. And what that means for the infrastructure, so this is, where we started, the old hub and spoke type model, still very valid. How we grew in Asia through Singapore was with, the large content, social media guys needing hubs, which they still activate in Singapore, where they service the surrounding Southeast Asia region. But what's happening more and more, they need to be to the end users. If you've got we touched on the latency point with the Gartner presentation about the 2-3 second latency. It doesn't always work if it's pinging Singapore and then pinging a data center or a server in America. You've got 100 million people coming online in Indonesia and Thailand. You need to activate them very, very closely. And if you ignore people for a moment and you talk about devices, cars, houses talking to each other, then the whole infrastructure piece around the edge gets even more interesting. And that's where, obviously, from cloud, we go to fog, as Cisco, I think, coined, and the other areas. And then a very key point, and where Schneider's doing some amazing stuff, is obviously around energy. So, as digital, we work closely with Greenpeace, let's say, around how, if you look at the energy efficiency we were able to achieve through Schneider products and other products, we pass that on to our customers. And our customers will always get a good rating from Greenpeace, ironically, but we won't. So because we can't, say that XXX is in our buildings, but because they have to show that to their customers. The big difference we've seen around that energy piece is before it was a tick in a box in an RFP. Now the consumer base of these large companies and the millennials are demanding it. So all these large companies aren't just investing in green energy to be good to the world, it's business sense, and it's absolutely critical. So this is going to be very interesting given we're, second or third after the airline industry in terms of the amount of energy we use, and it's going to grow and grow in terms of data. Interesting things happen around us, as mentioned earlier. Do we impact the national grid? And then the other question we're toying with, or a number of other data center providers are, can data centers themselves start producing energy? And how would that work? Because if you're going to have a data center in every locale, every village in Southeast Asia, they're going to be tied into that locale. You know, should they be part of that grid? Not becoming power producers for the whole country, but there needs to be a talk there around storage and especially electric battery technology as it develops. So another company, and again, this is all public knowledge because it's on our public top 20, but Uber is a company that grew with us. And this was an interesting growth story as well. So Uber started with a few racks in the US, and now takes halls and halls with us in different parts of the world. And that, again, around the economic growth, is based on this new economic customers growing. So when Uber came to us for a few racks and a few servers, that was what their need at that time as they grew. Within X amount of years, not 10 years, they started needing megawatts. And there's other companies now on that journey up. Which ones? You know, that's for the big investors to work out. This is another one, Black Jet. Order a private jet from your pocket if you don't want to go Uber, and you've got the money to. So if I touch very briefly, I won't stay too long on this on us. I just wanted to give a feel for where we are in the world and also focus a little bit on Asia. So that's the top 20 for us. The interesting thing here for us, as this changes, is there's only 2 non-US names on this list. You see, NTT and Tata. So I think this is going to be an interesting top 10 and top 20 list to look in the next 5 years, I'd suggest. And many companies, similar company and providers to us as well, because these companies and other companies and names that are household names in Asia and other parts of the world are growing at such a rate, it's really going to start needing more and more colo. The other thing that's interesting for the emerging markets, as mentioned earlier, is that they're very early on in that phase of getting through the outsourcing. Even Japan, which I'll touch on in our JV in Tokyo, it's very nascent in terms of that culture of outsourcing data centers. So these markets have huge opportunities, let alone the Indonesia, the Thailand, the Vietnam, the Myanmars, which just need the physical infrastructure in place to start with. So if we look at Asia, this is where we are. And I'll touch on the markets and their importance in terms of this new growth stage. Tokyo is an interesting one. So we've just gone into a JV with Mitsubishi Corporation, 50-50 JV. With our existing site in Osaka, and I'll mention Osaka because it was a very important partnership with Schneider to get that building going, especially the BMS software we use there. Tokyo was what came through the Mitsubishi partnership. It's actually in Mitaka, Western Tokyo. And this partnership is really with a plan to grow X-fold to another 10, 12 maybe data center within an X period. But again, this market, even though it's nascent in terms of colo, outsourced colo, is one of the largest data center markets in the world. I think 3 or 4, if I'm not mistaken. But it's all in-house data centers. It's all these huge technology companies in Japan and massive manufacturing houses, household names, all having various sized data centers around the Tokyo metro area. Now they're taking the leap of saying, right, we need that data stored within this region and accessible because of all the devices and connected cars that are coming on. They also have a lot of content outside region that's connected in, if you believe. A lot of data stored outside. And that, given the latency and the growth in data, is just not feasible anymore. So this is the Osaka facility. Not as it's today, it's finished today, but this was it getting built. And this is on a 150-year floodplain, which is key for Japan, obviously, with the disaster that happened in the north. This region of Japan became very interesting because it's on a secondary grid, which helps. It's also in terms of, again, tsunami risk at the lower end. But specifically to this site and also the sites in Singapore, it was the EcoStructure solutions from Schneider that were key. So if you look at the BMS solution that we used, again, in terms of customer take-up, and we have a lot of the large cloud, social, tech companies moving in to these regions. This is a key differentiator for us. The BMS is, one of the pieces, again, with the APIs that connect back out to the customer as needed. This is what they need. And we see that from multiple customers across the region and globally. They need to track exactly what's happening in their suites, and they're also looking at significant energy efficiency and gains across that. So we go and touch a little bit more on the future, conscious of time, so I'm going to try and wrap up before the 50 slides, wear everybody out a bit too much. This is what we've done for a while now, but again, it's not unique to us, so definitely not a sales pitch, but this is where the industry is going. This is us as the infrastructure layer, supported by Schneider as our partner. This is what it means to customers, right? They don't care, as the customer mentioned earlier, the Gartner analyst mentioned around the customer saying it's not the data center, it's the business solution. This is what they're accessing. To enable that, it's the network and connectivity. And this is a very simple anagram. And if you look around the cloud services spending growth, it's figures that will make any investor happy. $122 billion in 2017, according to IDC. And then you look at data center traffic alone, 15 zettabytes annually by 2020, with 92% of the workloads going through the cloud. So absolutely huge CAGRs in terms of data traffic. And then we talk about the cloud, it's worth saying which cloud, right? And so we've got the large cloud providers that enable everything, but if you look at the cloud industry landscape by sector, there's a huge amount of solutions out there. So again, that's why IBM coined the multi-cloud term very rightly, because customers need more than one cloud. And that's why we're investing in the service exchange piece, and Equinix has done similar in terms of its cloud exchange. It's getting out to multiple cloud access points from a private access, not the internet, when they need to spike up from demand, because the internet is not giving them the performance they need. And then I'll touch on something else around the future, the security point on the internet. Worries customers really a lot. So hybrid cloud, then you've got the hybrid multi-cloud, and then you've got the elastic hybrid multi-cloud. So any sort of term on cloud you want exists, and that's why in terms of access, we're looking at the service exchange platform, which again, what it does in terms of our offering, and other data center providers are trying to do that. Again, what puts us and one or two other providers in a unique position is a lot of the production nodes for the public cloud sit within our buildings. So we can do direct link like we do with IBM to the cloud, which is very, very, very quick latency and very secure latency because it's in the hall next door. So that's unique. But this gets you out to any cloud you need, because we acknowledge every cloud that the customer needs is not going to be in our building, but they need to get to it securely. So just to finish off a little bit around the future, but again, in terms of the speed of growth, anything can happen quickly. Top right is something that Google patented, which is the SHIP data center you might have seen. Another company, which was mentioned earlier, Keppel from Singapore, is doing something similar in Singapore. This is quite unique for the green messaging because it actually recycles plastic from the sea as it goes, which is quite key. This is Microsoft servers you might have seen on the seabed, which is investigating, looking more and more. And this is something we worked with the EDB, which is the Singapore Government Agency for Technology, which is a skyscraper tower data center. So it goes right the way up. Heat rises from the middle, but and the designs, because they like skyscrapers and you've got to build tall in Asia because there's no land to build sideways. It's very costly. These are so high, you need drones to fly up and service the servers. So unfortunately, human engineers have disappeared again in that model. This is something that I think Cisco invested in a startup. So I think it was mentioned earlier around how cyber and logical security is absolutely key, but it starts with physical. This was drone protection. So you might have seen, unfortunately, a lot of the attacks that are being foiled in various cities now involve drones attacking sort of stadiums. We're always conscious that data centers, touch wood not to date, but might become a target down the line. This is a very interesting thing because we're, as all of the top tier providers are, fully physical attack-proof, touch wood, as much as we can be, but drones are interesting. In Singapore, in fact, you can't fly a drone near the airport, so the government just locks it down, but other governments can't really do that, so it's a bit harder. So this is onto the, if we're looking at the future and the growth in data, one of the things that will unfortunately grow as well is the cyber threat. So this was now probably a year and a half ago. You'll remember the DDoS attacks in the US, brought down the domain name server provider. A lot of the large commerce sites in the US went down. This is a live shot at that stage of the cyber attacks coming in. So all the DDoS, distributed denial of service attacks coming in, you can actually go to this site and see live, which makes for interesting geographic political points because you can see which country is attacking which. But this was the DDoS attacks at that point. And again, this is going to be an absolute key point when you get to Internet of Things, as mentioned earlier. How are we going to secure the networks? How are we going to secure the devices? One of the interesting things that was said was if you're driving at 100, 120, 130 miles per hour, and you get, which will probably be all computer screen-based car, you get a ransomware come through saying, we're going to swerve you off the road if you don't transfer X amount within 2 minutes. You probably will transfer it. So there's a lot of hackable endpoints that are growing and growing that need to be looked at. The optimist side of it is the technology for the good guys is also increasing. So if you listen to any Elon Musk or any of the others, but mainly him, in terms of the OpenAI Foundation he founded, the reason was that. So his argument is that bad AI will exist, will happen. So when it does happen, we're in trouble. The humans won't be able to get close to fighting that. So you produce good AI to fight it. And then you get to a bit of Skynet type stuff, but hopefully not. But this is something else in Iceland. So this was a tower design in Iceland. You have no cooling whatsoever, which is nice in Iceland because it's cold. You just have the servers going straight up. The issue might be how many engineers you can get to be there constantly, but that's another design. And this is probably my favorite. For those that have watched The Martian with Matt Damon, that's the top. This is a Swedish data center company, I believe. I don't believe they're here, MDC, Modular Data Center Company, already created a modular rough design of what a data center on Mars would look like. And again, this is, science fiction, but so close, right? Elon Musk is already looking at, and I know Google have already got departments looking at the quality of service of internet traffic on a ship going towards Mars and calculating that and actually going to quality of service arguments. So one of the first things they're going to need when there is communications and data centers. So again, our industry grows beyond the borders here. Stats, you've probably been statted out, so I won't stay on that too much. An initiative, again, to have a look at for a lot of the stuff. We started this in Europe and have got a lot of traction in Asia. A lot of the Chinese internet exchange, Indian data center startups, and network companies. Just looking at some of these future trends from a development perspective. How will it impact customers? It's not just about the data center, as we've been saying for a long time. It's going to be the ecosystem of multiple providers. And this is the same with the edge, all coming together to produce the solutions for the future. And that's me. Hopefully not too long.